we must constantly look at things in a different way.
The Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast was created by two physical therapists out of the desire to learn more about the different educational roles in physical therapy and healthcare, and how healthcare education works by talking with educational leaders and people with different perspectives within physical therapy and across interdisciplinary lines on how education can be improved to disrupt the status quo of healthcare education. This is our journey, and thanks for listening. Are you a third-year physical therapy student that excels on tests when you have study guides, checklists, and deadlines? With all of the information available about how to prepare for the NPTE, it's easy to get disorganized and not feel prepared going into the big day. NPTE Prep Success is an online course that provides PT students easy-to-use study guides and step-by-step guidance through the NPTE preparation. To learn more, visit kylericeprep.com. Thank you again all for your continued support, and now for the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. My name is Brandon Paulin, and for this episode tonight, we actually are going to be chatting with Rachel Jermann. And actually, we had originally recorded this episode live from APTA's next conference in Orlando, Florida, but unfortunately, due to technical reasons and frankly, user error, that audio ended up getting distorted and not used. So we are having to re-record that. But we are excited again to chat with Rachel, who, for those of you who aren't aware, is the founder of Talas Media News, which is a podcast aimed at bringing the PT profession together by keeping us informed about what is happening in the world of physical therapy. And, Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down today to chat about communication across different branches of the profession, as I really respect and value what you're doing.
Thanks so much, Brandon. Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for rescheduling this for an 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to fit with my West Coast time schedule. So thank you so much.
It's all good. So Rachel, I realize that there might be quite a few people out there that are listening to this that still perhaps aren't aware of who you are or have not heard of Talas Media for that matter. Do you think you can kind of give our listeners your story to how you became a PT and how you ended up creating Talas Media to where it is now?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. I've always been really involved. When I was a student physical therapist not too long ago, there were just a lot of things about APTA that fascinated me. And the thing that really got me going was RC 1116, which was a motion that went to the House of Delegates. And the thing that alerted me to that student debt motion was my professor walking up to me and saying, "You need to read this." So if my professor had never done that, then I would have never known about this motion and I would never have done anything about it. And what that sparked, that you need to read this, what that sparked was a conversation with a bunch of other student physical therapists. It kind of snowballed a little bit. And I wound up being able to speak on the floor of the House of Delegates. But every time I reflect back on that, I think wow, what if my professor hadn't said something to me? And so Talas Media is kind of the end product of, I want to be like my professor telling other people, just pointing at things and saying, think about this. So starting a conversation, because you never know what one little piece of information can do. And so Talas Media we are a group of new grads and students, and we were brought together by this. We all love to sit down and read things like the APTA bylaws, or we like to sort through local news. We like to look for physical therapy news. So it's not all APTA. What we're trying to do is bring everything together and say what's most important for you to know this week in the physical therapy world. Here it is in a 10-minute news podcast. That's Talas Media. We've added a newsletter. So if you maybe don't listen or you want to grab the quick highlights, we've added the newsletter. You can subscribe there. But yeah, it's a bunch of us. There's 8 of us working pretty hard to kind of distill everything down so that you can have what you need to kind of get through your week.
I really like that. And I think to add on to that, one thing that I really do like about Talas Media is that they really don't just put out one point of view. I like how they really gather different opinions and different voices from each avenue of profession to really give kind of a unbiased view of the world of physical therapy, which I think is extremely valuable because it's very easy to get caught up in echo chambers in this profession.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we just put out a promo, actually. It says break your echo chamber. And I think that's what really resonates with our team too, is because that's what we are trying to do for ourselves. So when we all got together, it was okay, how do we like we all have this drive to like look around and figure out what the best thing is. And like, how do we promote that to the profession, and how do we enable others to do the same thing? Because often it's very hard to say like, oh, like go look at these 18 different sources and then form your unbiased opinion. Sometimes you just don't have that. You need someone to be like, okay, here's what the facts say. And I think that that's what we really try and do.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, I like how a lot of part of the mission behind the podcast is really to kind of address some of these current issues facing communication across the physical therapy profession. And, to kind of gain some context, I know you had kind of alluded to really getting out of the echo chambers as one and a couple others, but what are some of the big current issues facing communication across the PT profession? And why do you feel that these issues exist to the extent that they do?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues, and you have already brought it up, is the echo chamber, or we tend to silo ourselves. And I don't know if that's like, I don't think that we inherently think about that. I don't know if that's completely each person's separate personal issue. I think it's just more of a thing where we don't have all the information in one spot to look at and say like, okay, like this is what's happening in the ortho world, but here's what's also happening in the pediatrics world. And those two things kind of bump up together. It's almost like you have to be a member of the ortho section and the ped section and every other section in order to really get the news and look at it from that 30,000 foot view. The APTA puts out things, but it's not everything. And sometimes it doesn't have that 30,000 foot view. And there are, shocker, PTs who are not in the APTA. So we tend to stay in the realm that we've kind of positioned ourselves in. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers to looking at different ideas and trying to communicate across the profession, for sure.
Indeed. And I think, kind of bringing it back to patient care, if there are clinicians who are asking, because, I don't want people to think with this that having biases or having maybe an initial thought process that you have is always a bad thing. Because at the end of the day, we all do. We all have our unique own sets of biases and expectations and beliefs on things. And that's not always wrong. But I think the key that Rachel's really bringing up is that it's okay to have that. You just have to be open to learning and maybe having that challenge to further change your development and how you're thinking of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I think too that, I think sometimes we undervalue just having multiple contacts with something, or having contacts, and it doesn't even have to be something crazy. It doesn't have to be like you sit down and talk to someone. It could be you overhear something, right? And so you just need to kind of expand your opportunities to overhear things, because that often, like the external milieu of stuff that we encounter every day, can influence us in ways that we don't even realize.
Oh, absolutely. And, to kind of go through another couple of unique things, just thinking about regarding to communication across the profession. I'm kind of really curious to get your thoughts on what are the issues with communication between maybe some of the organizations within PT?
Yeah, I think that they all communicate kind of internally to each other, but it's never transparent to the rest of us how it looks. Like everything looks siloed from the outside. I do think that the sections do, or the academies as they're now called, right? They do kind of come together and try and communicate, or like the American Academy of Orthopedic Manual Physical Therapists does talk to APTA, but I think that it's through such interesting and convoluted channels that there's nobody who's maybe really free to stand back and say, oh, here's the story. Here's the 30,000 foot view. Everyone who's in it understands that. But to the rest of us, it just looks like total chaos, or it just is nothing we'd ever understand.
And I think part of the work that you've done in regards to residency fellowship through Talas has definitely shed some light on that, because I think you've done a very good job with kind of breaking down that tangled web that exists, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around that, to be real honest with you.
So hard. It took us forever to write that post, because we had to keep coming back to it and being like, I think this is right. Okay, hang on. We're going to go pick through the bylaws and line them up again and just make sure. Yeah. And I agree with that. So kind of taking a next level of that. So let's get into kind of a buzzword now these days is social media. So what are some of the big issues that you're seeing with social media in regards to communication throughout the profession? I think might be going out on a limb here, but people don't tend to fact check what they see on social media, which I know it's so easy to like interact and hit like and share and retweet. But I think often, especially if it's coming from someone that maybe is widely known, it would just retweet it. It's like, cool, that person said something awesome. Now, I came across something the other day. I think it was back when the shootings occurred at Marjorie Stoneman, and someone had said something like, "Oh, it was done with an AR-15." It's like, okay, so I go and I'm like, that doesn't sound right to me, and sure enough, it wasn't. But this thing had gotten like millions of retweets, and nobody stopped to check and say like, "Oh, before I retweet that, is that actually true?" And I think the same thing happens on a smaller scale in the PT world. And back a couple months ago, I think maybe in the January issue of JOSPT, and I can't remember that, but you can always post the link. There was this great piece on the use of social media in putting out research and how we need to really look at who the true positives are. And the true positive is someone who actually has like done the research or is an expert on that. Not the false positive who like is just really loud, but that person who's actually done the research. So you want to make sure you're finding those people. You want to make sure, is this right before I go and retweet? And I think like that little, like microcosm of getting a little more picky about what we're sharing can really help.
I agree. I definitely think it's a very complex problem though. And I think I do agree with the total concept of that article with true and false positives and negatives. I totally agree with that.
I think that we need to recognize that how someone is deemed to be an expert can be very subjective, and how everyone defines an expert and how everyone determines credibility is not always the same. And I think we need to move past the notion that only one person is an expert on the topic, and instead consider a group of people that are all well-versed and credible on a subject matter that are in different roles, such as researcher, clinician, educator, and even patients. As you know, I think we all need to come together as we need representation of all groups to get the best view of the subject matter.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's so hard to define. And there's been, we all talk about it and we're like, and the other thing is that sometimes the people who are the true experts aren't on social media. And you're never getting that. And so I wrote this article on the women in PT movement that we've been seeing. And I think one of the arguments against women in PT that usually comes up is, well, we have all these women in leadership. Why are we saying that women are not recognized in the PT profession? And that's a valid point. However, if you change the argument and you nuance it more and you say, well, who are we actually talking to? Who are we bringing forward as our experts? And I actually had some good data that I had pulled when I was working before in the podcasting world. And I actually ran through and I ran the numbers. And I found out that only 35% of guests, that was the highest across all podcasts. The highest percentage of women guests was 35%. The lowest was 14%. And if you think about that and you think about how many women there are in our profession, I think it's like 60-40. We might be getting closer to 50-50 women, men. But if you think about that, if you're randomly selecting an expert, half the time you should be picking a woman. But that's not what's happening. And so is the argument then, okay, but the men are louder, and so therefore they get picked more often. And I think you bring up a great point, Brandon, is you have to do a lot of legwork sometimes to find the true expert.
Yeah. And I think to add another thing on top of that, I think, in terms of social media presence and who we see and what content we're exposed to, it is reliant heavily on marketing.
Right.
The people that are the loudest tend to be not the very best, but they tend to be very effective marketers with good following. So they're going to get in front of a lot more people than perhaps maybe someone who's very credible but is not good at marketing.
Yes.
And it's hard to say because I don't see the loud people toning that down. And to be honest, if it's working for them, there's no incentive for them to do that. So right. I think it's how can we build up the other people, the true positives, to compete at that level, if not better. And I don't know the right way to do that.
Right. And my only suggestion was, well, if you feel like maybe you're not the best expert, point to the better one.
But then that threatens their money, though.
That's true.
It's not an easy topic.
It's convoluted.
It is, but I mean, it's not an easy discussion.
No, not at all.
And
I think it's especially when you put it in like the women in PT argument, I think that people get flared up easily. And I don't think that the argument is, we don't have enough women leaders. I think it's something completely different. It's that promotion piece is really what it is.
Right. And I mean, there are some good true positives out there that are doing very good with that. No doubts. Is that the majority? I would argue no.
No, I wouldn't. I think that sometimes the quietest people are like the biggest experts because they're off doing stuff.
But then no one knows about them. So then it's kind of this like we're in limbo here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely a tough topic. And we could probably talk on hours for that. But
yes.
So in terms of, what are your thoughts on, kind of going back in terms of some of these other issues? What do you think in terms of what are some other solutions, maybe outside of social media, but just kind of how to improve communication across profession? What are some other solutions that you could think of that perhaps should be worth exploring to maybe help also contribute to some of these issues?
I think that we need to support, this is going to sound like a shameless plug for Talas, but support organizations or podcasts or other things that really broaden your view, right? So if you don't want to do the background research, it's okay to admit that. Like, I'm so grateful we have CPGs. Can I just say? All right. Some of them might be outdated, yes, and I need to find new research, but the ones that we do have that are good, I appreciate whoever did the background work. So appreciate those people who did the background work and be willing to read what they're putting out. Even doing things like, you can support the APTA. They put out a lot of news. They do a lot of work for us. But looking outside your own kind of spot in the universe, like take a gander at what's on the Pediatric section website or other sites. So kind of keeping your options open. It's hard to find a solution to that problem because we are automatically going to look at the thing that is in front of our face, right? We are the generation that scrolls. And if it's not there, we already have information overload at our fingertips. We have endless scroll on everything now. And so if you have endless scroll, what's your incentive to like go look something up or go Google it?
Absolutely. Nothing. Well, and social media will tailor what you see based on how you interact with it. And
absolutely. Yeah. Although I did see a couple weeks ago that Facebook is getting rid of its trending because that was because the trending tab, I guess, and it makes sense. The trending tab was then, increasing the number of things that you liked to see, right? So it'll be really interesting to see as like Facebook goes through its transition of trying to make things more like bipartisan or whatever it's going to do. It'll be really interesting to see how your newsfeed changes.
Absolutely. And I think kind of going to add, I hate to throw another wrench in here with this, but getting to more of the communication aspect is that it's really hard to find a standardized way to really deliver a medium that's going to hit everyone. Because at the end of the day, some people really like written, some people like video, some people like audio, some people have different habits, how they check for their updates, phone, computer, website, and it's hard. Because everyone's going to have different habits and biases that how they get their information. You and I are going to have differences on that. And that's not necessarily wrong, but I don't know how to crack that piece.
Well, and that's something that we struggle with at Talas because, I read my news. I will listen to like I go to bed listening to NPR and I wake up listening to NPR, but that's how I get my news that way. And I subscribe to what do I subscribe to? Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Okay. And then I have Reuters that pops up on my phone. So that's how I get my news. But we're trying to, when we started Talas, we're okay, so we're going to do a news podcast. And then we ran into how many people actually prefer to read their news? If we really want to get news out and want this to work, we're going to have to do multiple channels. We're going to have to find multiple creative ways to put this in front of people because it's all about impressions, right? How many times how many times can I overhear something before it rings? I need to pay attention to that. So yeah, it's a big challenge. Absolutely.
Totally. And now I'm kind of curious, just because from your angle with Talas of kind of really with this news mission, what are some of the other issues that you guys have faced, apart from what we've already talked about, in regards of kind of helping to improve communication between the profession? What else have you guys kind of found as a barrier from doing that from Talas's point of view?
One of the things that we really need to do a better job on, or kind of, again, keep adding to the, this is what we are, this is what we do. It's we're kind of different from other podcasts because we're distilling. We're like, we have 10 minutes of news every Monday. And then people are like, wait a minute, you do what? And they're like, well, who do you interview? And I'm like, well, I interview people that are going to give me news. So they're like, well, wait a minute. So what do I listen to? I'm like, you listen to the 10-minute news podcast. So I think it's hard from our end to kind of shift people to that perspective of this is more like an NPR than just sitting down and listening to an awesome interview. So that's challenging, getting people to make that switch in their minds. I think the other thing that's really challenging is how we're trying to find news. So being able to sort through a lot of stuff requires a lot of people. It requires people who are willing to send us stuff and interact with us and say like, hey, this is what you're not paying attention to. And we never take that as like something bad. We're always like, oh, thank God someone else has, they want us to pay attention to this. And this is a really good thing to pay attention to. Because again, and I just got off a team call tonight and we were talking, we're like, well, we're trying to get people from across the profession, but in reality, a lot of us on our team are ortho-based. And so we're already skewed. We recognize that bias, and bringing more people on who have a bigger view or a view of a different slice of the pie of PT, like that's totally what we need to do.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's definitely, it's been fun from what we've done too. We've tried to go on outside the PT profession, like trying to get doctors, OTs, pharmacy students. We've tried to go that route too, but I agree. Even from us too, we can do more from the neuro standpoint, the ped standpoint. We're definitely, it's one of our biases too.
Right. And it's great to address your own bias. And then you're like, wait, how do I fix this?
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
So kind of going back, I know you had kind of mentioned that a couple of the limitations were that trying to find the news, how to try to really collect all that, but then also how to direct people and kind of show them kind of what this really is and how it's different. What are you guys kind of other than what you've said already, what are some other things that Talus is looking to do to continue to improve communication outreach kind of between professions to further the mission?
So between the profession, in the profession, I guess would be the correct terminology, would be we're trying to create relationships with different sections or with the academies. We're also trying to create relationships with the states and say like, okay, can you like CC us in on your press releases or whatever you're sending out? Is there a person you want to assign to us? Do you want us to come to your conference? Like, how do you want to do it? What's the best way? Like, what's not known about your corner of the universe that you want the world to know? So trying to develop those relationships, and that always takes time. And then also reaching out to people, trying to do more polls or like get people to engage on Facebook. And again, I think, one of my mentors said this to me is you put out a survey and you get responses from 100% of the people who like to take surveys, right? So everything is a little skewed. Everything's a little biased, but really trying to reach out through as many avenues as possible so that we get more overlap in our Venn diagram of the universe, right? So we bring all the circles closer together. As far as trying to connect to other professions, I keep an eye out, and I read the AMA Wire because I have clearly nothing better to do. So I'll read like the AMA Wire, and I don't think that other professions have anything like this yet. I've been trying to keep an eye out, trying to follow around and see. But I do think that keeping an eye on what other professions are writing and putting out gives us better ground to stand on in the PT profession. So say if we're going to do something on gun violence, right? And we're like all up in arms about it here in the PT profession. Well, a good perspective is, hey, the AMA just passed a bunch of policy about gun violence and about legislation for gun violence. So all of a sudden we have perspective. It's like you're building your map, right? And hopefully someday we can be the same to another profession. And like, I don't know if anyone looks at Talas from outside PT, but hopefully we can all have that common ground.
No, absolutely. I think even from our perspective of really trying to reach out to professions outside and really kind of seeing what they're doing from education definitely provides some insight. And, we have to take it for what it is because our professions are not the exact same. So we shouldn't try to copy it, but at least let's take that idea and think about how it could be applied. If it's right for us, to at least consider a different option. And I find that very valuable.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the translation between professions, right? It's like, something doesn't translate exactly from one language to the other, but you can get kind of that like, oh yeah, this is kind of what it's like. That's still valuable.
Right. I can still translate it somewhat efficiently.
Yeah, totally.
So to kind of, because I'm just kind of really curious here, because, with you guys doing more kind of a news-based podcast, apart from what you've kind of already said, what are some of the most interesting and uncommon things that you feel that most PTs aren't aware of regarding the news and doing a podcast?
I would say how hard it is to distill information down into like a 30-second soundbite. I mean, that is so hard. It's how do I get you to care about something in 30 seconds? Because your mind is going to wander after those 30. Like, how do I engage you? Like, what is my first sentence, my opening line going to be to get you to pay attention? And then how do I fit as much information as possible into that soundbite? And I mean, it takes a lot. We're getting better at it, but sometimes we don't, sometimes we're not completely good at it. And if you try and listen, I mean, I that's why I wake up listening to like NPR. It's like, okay, how do they do it? And how do I replicate it? There's a lot of background work that goes into finding the right stuff. If I have multiple sources for one little soundbite, I got to somehow incorporate and slam it all together, with finesse. I say slam, but finesse, right? And then what needs to be written content and what can you process in that 30 seconds or a minute? So how do I best get this information across to you?
I think that's really important, and I think that's a very good that's a very legit struggle. I think to kind of add on one on top of this, I'm curious what your thoughts are too, because you have a big team with Talas and such, is how much effort and work it actually takes to put a show up. Like, I don't think most people have any idea the work that's involved with actually making something happen.
And you totally know this, Brandon, right? Because it's like you record a 45-minute podcast, right? And then you're like, okay, so that's at least an hour and a half of editing. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then you need graphics for it, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're like, okay, I got to go in. I got to do the show note or whatever the little blurb is I'm going to do. I have to upload it all to the website. I have to upload it to my host. So anyway, it's a lot of work. And
it's a lot of work.
Yeah. And I think part of it, what we're getting into our groove with Talas is how we split up that work and how we all coordinate it. Because even if you split that work up, it's still the same amount of hours. Now you got more people doing it, and it has to be really well coordinated or you hit snags. So to get out our 10-minute news podcast, it's probably a good hour's worth of hunting up information, probably an hour's worth of like editing and picking through like what's going to go in our newsletter, what's going to go in the newscast, like another like half hour to an hour or so of like coordinating, making sure the wording is right, really getting it right for reading through it a couple times, because you never read something right the first time, God forbid. You got to record it and then edit it. So, I mean, we're already looking at like 4 or 5 hours of stuff, and that we haven't even gotten to writing the show note and doing the graphics and scheduling all the social media because we need to promote it. Otherwise no one will listen. So yeah. Ton of work.
Absolutely.
And my kudos to you for doing all of that. I think do you guys release twice a week?
Well, we're doing mostly once a week, but lately because we have such an abundance of content, we're starting to do 2 times a week that we've already had edited out so we can start to decrease some of that content bank. But
yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work between just to kind of add on a little bit to that is in terms of, because our show is a little bit more like we focus primarily on interviews. Mm-hmm. So ours are more between 30 minutes to an hour long interviews. That's just kind of what we do. But in terms of, so we reach out to we think of the topic, we reach out to we search for a guest. We reach out to
all about that.
We wait for a response for the guest. We coordinate a schedule. We write up the interview questions. We send them to the guest. Then we do the interview. We record it. Then we'll normally do the pictures beforehand to promote them too. So we're all done with that. So we won't have to do that at all later. Then we edit it. You have to put it all in the show notes. But thankfully, honestly, we've kind of developed because me and Scott actually did this initially. So me and him, I kind of did a lot of the other stuff and Scott did a lot of the website stuff. So with me being able to learn everything on my own, now I'm starting to train other people that are coming in to do these other tasks. So I know what it's like and I can kind of supervise that. But then once they get ready, they can just mingle between themselves and kind of work it out.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just so much work and I had completely forgotten. Oh yeah. We also contact people constantly. It's like, I think I sat down the one day and someone was like, oh, can you list out all the steps it takes? And I was like, oh, sure. And 40 line items down on the spreadsheet. I'm like, this was much more than I thought it was going to be. I'm not even done yet.
Even for us with guests, like we get so many people that say, you should check out this person for this and this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to lie. Our list that we have to contact is like through the 40s and 50s now. And that's going to take a long time for us to get through. And
yeah. So if you're ever asked to be like on a podcast or ever when someone recommends you, don't ever feel bad that it takes us forever to get back to you. We're really sorry.
Amen to that. Well, and even like for us, like we have like over 30 episodes that need to be put out. So from the time we interview to when it's going to be put out is probably going to be anywhere between 4 to 6 months, just to keep it chronological. Unless someone says, I have this event coming up, could we please get this out before then yes, we can expedite that request.
That's another really good point that you bring up, and that we have a particular challenge with, is because part of it is, it's like, okay, that 30-second soundbite, I have like a 10 to 12 minute newscast because I don't want to overwhelm you guys, right? What is the thing that we need to put out this week? Because like we have, like sometimes we have content and we're like, yeah, but is this like really relevant current to this week, or can we push it for next week? And then if we push it to the week after, we're like, crap, now we have something that's more current and relevant that happened over the week. So now what? So that's definitely a challenge of like, how do we put stuff out as well?
Oh, absolutely. And especially when you've already made an episode that you're like, okay, it's all ready to go. It's all ready to be released. And then you're like, oh, do I have to do another one? You're kind of like, oh man.
Right.
I mean,
totally.
Just podcast struggles. So, Rachel, to kind of switch gears a little bit here, outside of media and such, just kind of on a personal note, what are some either books or resources that you've come across that really made a difference for you in terms of, your development and being an effective healthcare clinician?
Actually, so let's see. Other resources. I would actually say that like all the people that I've had contacts with and met have really influenced me. Whether I like met you in like this like one-off conversation and you said this like totally random thing to me and then my brain went off on a tangent, like all of that is incredibly valuable to me. So for me, things like going to conferences and having conversations with different people and meeting new people is really important for my growth as a clinician because it gives me different things to think about. As I'm also in a residency program, so I get great mentorship, which is awesome. Just having that clinical, like someone there with you in the room, helping you treat your patients. And they're saying like, oh, but what about this? Or like, yeah, I don't know either. And that's a really good growth moment for me. As far as reading and resources, I like read fiction. I read the news and then I read fiction. So I tweet sometimes about what I read. And like, so the other day I was looking up like the hardbound copies of Harry Potter because, it's my life. I'm a nerd. It's great.
Nothing wrong with that. What's funny? I have a confession to make. So when before 6 months ago, I personally stopped reading fiction because I was kind of like, I don't know if you've gone through this too, but I'm kind of like, oh, fiction, it's not real. I want to read all this nonfiction to get me more truth and development. But then we actually had Will Butler on, and he actually said, I actually was that way too. But then I started reading fiction, and he's like, it totally puts you in a different frame of reference to really calm and reflect and not worry about that. And I'm like, I really didn't think about it that way, but that makes a lot of sense. And I'm totally going to give that a try now. So now I do not bash fiction like I used to.
Yeah, actually, I think my profile header on Facebook says something like, it's for, there's this great webcomic called A Softer World, which you should check it out. It'll like either make you really, think deep thoughts, or you're going to be like, oh my God, that's creepy. But either way, A Softer World. And I have one of their comics as like my profile picture or something on Facebook. And it says, truth is stranger than fiction if you don't read much. And so that's how I'm like, oh, cool, I can read fiction because broadens my horizons.
Even if it's fiction, yes, it may not be based on a true factual thing, but there's always an underlying message. There's always something that you can take from it, whether it be putting yourself in a different character and immersing in a different frame of mind to maybe get off of your current mindset, or is there an underlying theme or message that you can maybe take from to incorporate into your life? I mean, there's a way that you can incorporate it. You just have to look for it.
Absolutely. I would say the one like nonfiction thing that I follow or read, I subscribe to Seth Godin's blog because he writes in like bite-sized information. So it's like never more than a paragraph. And so it just comes into my email every day. and I just like read through what he writes because he's written some great books on marketing and promotion. And a lot of his stuff resonates with me. And I think that's why I read it, because it's like my little pick-me-up every day. But other than that, I don't read much nonfiction unless it's research papers. So
nice. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
well, especially with you doing residency and all that you're doing, it's kind of hard to do that.
Yeah.
But you're
almost done though.
Almost done. So, Rachel, it's been a really good discussion talking about kind of communication across the profession, some of the issues going on from different facets, but also some ways that from a solution standpoint that you and others are trying to help make some positive change in that regard. But also, of course, realizing that there's other avenues too that we can consider too. And, we like to ask this follow-up question at the end of every episode, because we're just really curious what everyone's thoughts are on this question, because with us being an education podcast primarily, we would love to get this answer. So the question is, if you could change one aspect of healthcare education, whether that be DPT or other healthcare provider related, which aspect would you change and how would you change it?
Oh, I'd get rid of that 7:30 a.m. modalities class in a heartbeat.
Okay. All right.
And not just because it's at 7:30 a.m. because it's
the modality. Our number one answer that we get is cost. That's by far the most common. Number two would probably be curriculum change. So along those lines, modalities, pain science, incorporating and changing and updating the curriculum and testing material seems to be a close second. Number three is probably more interprofessional education and collaboration.
I'll pick number one too, any day.
Well, at the end of the day, I think it's hard because I do agree with the cost issue. There's no doubts that it's astronomical. However, I do think it is ultimately up to the student to make that decision. I think anyone who's considering going into the field, you better research it. You better research all the avenues about it. You should research the cost. You should research the salary. And you should figure out, is that something you want to do? I think if you're okay with that and you're okay with the situation as it exists, no problem. But I have an issue with people who don't research into that and then they get frustrated because like, oh, well, I didn't know this. Like, well, to be fair, I don't put as much blame on the program because if you didn't do your research, I'm not saying I don't think we need to make the cost better. I'm not trying to take away from that.
Yeah.
But I do think that overall, I think people need to research it more before they go into it.
Yeah, and I think I'm doing some more background research, and I was talking to Joe Reinke and Will Butler.
Love those guys.
Yep, and I think that schools are becoming more transparent, but I think schools kind of stepping up and saying like, okay, here's going to be your debt to income ratio. Like, I know that the stuff is out there, but sometimes when you are pre-PT and you're like, I just want to go to PT school, I think that sometimes those blinders are on.
Oh yeah.
And we're, it's a good profession.
At the same time, there's also a lot of opportunity in the profession too. If you really want to be exemplary, or if you really want to achieve a different lifestyle than the 9-to-5, or, from a salary perspective and a professional standpoint, you're going to have to do stuff outside the box.
Absolutely. I don't think you'll ever make 6 figures working as a 9-to-5 clinician unless you live in the Bay Area, and then
you'll be losing most of it anyway.
Because you need to pay for your rent.
Right. But so I think there's a lot of truth in that, and there is a lot of opportunity, but you have to be willing to recognize that if you want a 9-to-5 thing, then it's probably not the best fit for you.
Right. And they're even figuring that out with physicians. Physicians make money, but they're getting burned out at like a rate of like 50%. And so there's a lot of different factors that really play into how everything, plays out in the long run.
Totally. No, I completely agree. And so, Rachel, so for our audience, perhaps who maybe wants to look into either you, Talas, a little bit more, or they've just kind of got a question for you to kind of reach out and ask a follow-up question based on what we've talked about or some of the other work you guys have done, where can people find you online or on social media?
Great question. All right, guys, this is super easy. On every social media platform. So we are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, and we are on Twitter. We are at Talas Media. So that's at TALUSMEDIA. We are talasmedia.org as our website. If you want to tweet at me personally, I'm at RJ Gottagoni. So you can always reach out to me personally. We have several correspondents, and they're all listed on our website at talasmedia.org/team. So definitely check us out there. You can reach out to any one of us. And we have a contact us form through the website. And again, that's talasmedia.org. We have a newsletter, so if you want to stay up to date, just go to talasmedia.org/subscribe. That's also where you can access us on iTunes or Android, wherever you want to go.
Excellent. And one last random question. How did you come up with your Twitter handle?
I don't remember. What was I doing? I was starting PT school. So it was like the third week of PT school. And I think we've been
goniometers.
The goniometer. And I was like, crap, I need a new Twitter handle because mine was probably not appropriate. And so like at RJ Got a Goni. Yeah, I don't know. And then I put it on my badge when I went to a conference and
it just stuck.
Never changed since. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, thanks again so much for all the work and stuff that you guys have done through Talas. And I look forward to seeing what you guys continue to do. And again, thank you for coming on the chat tonight. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a pleasure chatting. Love the 20 minutes pre-chat where we, tossed around ideas. So thanks so much for having me on the show.
That's what it's all about, right?
Yes.
Access to healthcare is one of the largest issues facing both providers and patients, as millions of people worldwide lack timely and affordable access to healthcare. Anywhere Healthcare, a telehealth platform, is a simple, low-cost option for providers and patients that eliminates the barriers to access to all kinds of healthcare. To find out more, check out anywhere.healthcare, which is available in our show notes. And if you use the code HET in all caps when you email to sign up, you'll save 25% off the total cost. Thank you for attending class today, and we hope that you learned something and gained value from the content.
If you'd like to schedule office hours with us, feel free to add us on Twitter at HET Podcast, on Instagram, HET Podcast, on Facebook, the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast, and the homepage, healthcareeducationtransformationpodcast.com.
And for those of you following along in the syllabus, extra credit can be obtained by liking us, sharing us, and leaving a review.
Let's continue our journey up Mount Educational Success as lifelong learners.